Today we're back looking at some creepy true crime TikToks.
Look, I'm gonna say this once, but I'm not saying it again. Part her eyes and release all that chaos from her mind. Amateur.
So the man that you just saw in that creepy TikTok video was 28-year-old James Lee Bonewitz. And on June 23rd, 2022, he stabbed 4 people and killed 2 of them in Indiana.
Oh,
now,
wow.
before all this went down, James didn't have a colorful criminal history. He seemed like he was just your average guy. And he spent a lot of time posting here on TikTok on his account Bonewitz, an account which to this day is still up. Now, I couldn't really find any information on why James carried out these crimes, but he did. So on the night of June 23rd, the police in town got a report of a suspicious man at a local store. Apparently, this scraggly-haired man was inside of the store holding 2 orange-handled knives, but before the police could arrive, he left in his sedan. Then, security camera footage captured him parking at a gas station and exiting his vehicle. And for some reason, he walked over into a neighborhood, entered people's homes, and started stabbing. Sadly, a couple would die in the stabbing. Caitlin Huddleston England and her husband, Danny England. Now, Caitlin survived the initial stabbing. She was transported to a local hospital where she was pronounced dead. But on that evening, Danny was found on the back porch of the home with a massive laceration in his chest and a deep cut in his arm, and he was already dead when authorities arrived. But that wasn't enough for James. There was also a man that they discovered in the back door of the home with multiple cuts all over his body, who had been stabbed multiple times. His name was Bo Williamson, and he survived the attack. James had also stabbed another man, this time in the bathroom of the house. This man was identified as Terry Solomon II, and he had cuts all over his abdomen. Terry would eventually tell the police that he heard his neighbors screaming, he had rushed over to help, and that's when he was attacked by James. So I tried to find as much information about this crime spree as I could, but I couldn't really figure out exactly why James had carried out this crime spree. At the end of the day, he had viciously stabbed 4 people and 2 of them had died. And after he had stabbed all of them, he had gotten in his vehicle, driven away, and he was discovered by police the next morning hiding out in a field covered in blood. So James would eventually sign a plea deal and admitted guilt to all of the crimes.
That's so scary.
And he was eventually sentenced to 85 years in prison, which means he's more than likely going to die in there. I just don't understand exactly why this crime happened, but it really is a tragedy. And now this couple's children, because of one man's selfish actions, will never get to know their parents.
I think that's what's so sad about this whole situation. First of all, people died, people got injured, and people lost their lives. It's heartbreaking. But he took away 2 parents from their 4 children. Them children are very, very young. Some of them babies aren't gonna have any memories of their parents. That's heartbreaking, isn't it? People dilated even when the lights are on in the video, sign of psychosis. Honestly, that was a terrifying mugshot. I'm telling you, a lot of these people always have a certain look in their eyes. It's like they've got eyes, but there's no soul behind their eyes. There's nothing behind them eyes, are just evil. It's even sadder when you knew the couple that died were moving out of the house the very next day. That's even more heartbreaking. And even worse, it's the fact that 2 parents died and their children no longer have parents. I just don't understand how anyone could do anything like that. How can you be so evil to do that?
Imagine coming home one night to find scattered human body parts on your bathroom floor.
Oh no.
Justin Barnett was only 23 years old when he vanished in 1995. It was June the 3rd and he was living in Birmingham, Alabama with his ex-girlfriend Sheila Horton. Now, Justin had plans to go to a party that night and was due to meet a new girl there. That evening, he borrowed his ex Sheila's car and went out to meet some friends for a drink beforehand. After enjoying the drinks, he told his friends that he was off to meet a girl and that he would be back at some point later. However, he never returned. His friends tried to get in contact with him and see where he was, but they couldn't reach him, so they just presumed maybe he's gone home to sleep. When Justin's ex Sheila got back to the house as well at 2 a.m, she noticed he wasn't home. She was a little bit concerned but figured maybe he would be back in the morning. The day after, when he failed to come back home, he was reported missing to police. It would be days later that a worrying discovery was made. Sheila's car was found in Lakeview with no sign of Justin. However, this was particularly suspicious because police had actually searched the area where they did find the car previously and the car hadn't been there. It was an agonising 2 decades before any news. It was actually January 2015 and a man with a guilty conscience showed up to a police station to make a statement. He was called Jonathan Abney and he was only 18 years old at the time of Justin's disappearance. He had some news that would stun investigators. He'd been living with his older sister Trisha and her boyfriend Jeff Martin at the time of Justin's vanishing. On the night of the 3rd of June 1995, he came home to a scene like that out of a horror film. Dismembered body parts lay all over the bathroom floor and the limbs belonged to Justin. Jonathan had actually met Justin just once previously when he was buying substances. Jonathan told officers that his sister had convinced him to go out that night so she and Justin could have some alone time. However, she had very sinister plans for the evening. Her and her partner planned to rob Justin, but this would go horribly wrong. They ended up stabbing Justin to death, and Jonathan had helped the pair get rid of Justin's body. Jonathan then took Sheila's car to the place where police had found it. Now, Trisha was arrested and Jeff actually ended his own life shortly after. Trisha was given life in prison without parole, and Jonathan was actually given immunity for his confession and cooperation.
Obviously, it's good that he came forward and finally was able to close that case. However, he lived for 20 years knowing that. Surely at that point he was complicit, like he knew what he was doing. 2 decades is crazy. Exactly 2 decades. How long is that? Like 20 years? That's how old I am. So basically my whole life they kept that a secret. And yet again, it would have continued to be a secret if that guy never went and told the police. Isn't it crazy to think she would have lived her life without telling people she literally murdered somebody? 2 decades, but at least the family got closure at some point. If he hadn't have come forward, they likely wouldn't have ever known what happened to him. That's the creepy bit. It's the fact that all 3 of them like knew about it but never told anyone for 20 years. 20 years, you realize how long that is? That's just awful, isn't it? Like, oh, you really don't know what's going on in people's heads, do you?
This guy had a picture of his mother's killer hanging in his bedroom for almost 40 years and had no clue. One morning back in 1981, Jeff and his younger brother Tim are suddenly awoken by police saying, hey, you gotta come with us. And as Tim is being led past his mother's room, which is closed, an officer from inside flings that door wide open, and Tim can see right in there, scarring this image permanently into his mind.
Why would a police officer
Linda
do
Slayton's
that?
sister Judy had just dropped by for their morning coffee routine. She lived just a few doors down in the same apartment building, but no one answered the door, and Judy thought, that's a little weird, but, it's probably nothing, and she left. But as she's leaving, she turns and sees that the bedroom window is just left wide open. So she goes over to that window and takes a peek inside and sees her sister lying sideways on the bed, posed in a way that made it very clear that a disturbing attack had taken place. A metal coat hanger still tightly wrapped around her neck, and the boys slept through the whole thing, had no idea. Jeff and Tim went off to live with their grandparents. They were back at school within a few weeks, and they were just kind of left wondering and also in fear that this person who they referred to as the monster would come back for them. Along with the grandparents, someone had also been there for Timothy in particular at the time, Coach Joe. Coach Joe was Tim's football coach and was actually a pretty big presence in his life, would drive him to and from practice. He was almost like an authority, you could even say father figure to Tim. And Coach Joe, well, he was always making sure Tim was doing okay, constantly checking up, how you holding up, Timmy? Everything okay? But he was also a little curious and would start to be like, hey, how's the investigation going? Any leads, developments? He also continued to drive him to football practice. This was taken 1 month after Tim lost his mom, and that picture was proudly hung in Tim's house for the next 40 years, while the case also went completely cold. Now, right after the crime, when the cops are talking to Tim, they ask him what he was doing the day before, basically, and he said that he was at football and that Coach Joe had driven him home. But even though police knew this at the time, they thought that the ex-husband and also the older brother, Jeffy, apparently had recently, like a day before or something, gotten in a fight with his mom. They thought that those two were more compelling suspects, and they were pretty much instantly cleared. Well, in 2019, using some of the DNA that was recovered at the scene in 1981, with the help of genetic genealogy, they got their answer. Joseph Mills, Coach Joe, after giving Tim a lift home, returns to the home later that night when the family is out. He takes the screen off the window, it's unlocked, he wiggles through, hides in the closet, waits there until everybody comes home, and he sits in there for a while until everybody's sleeping before emerging from the closet and doing what he does to Linda.
That right there is absolutely terrifying. First of all, the fact that happened, but it's also the fact that like the guy who done it was so close to the kid. It's kind of like he kept them around him, so it means he could constantly get off to the fact that he took their mother. She the only one they know about right now. Yeah, that's it. Definitely possible there's more. I mean, there could be. That's freaky, isn't it? Oh, I don't like that. It's the fact that like he knew what he done and he lived with that secret for like 40 years. That monster lived his whole life very close to the son. Yeah, it's extremely messed up. I can't get over the fact he remained close with the son and drove him to practice a number of months after the crime. Why do you think he done it though, probably because he knew he had power doing that. Obviously that son was very, very vulnerable, and that man knew that he took his mother away. So for him, it was kind of like his way of still having power over the mother. You know, what's the closest thing to a mother? Probably their children. Kids were right, he was a monster and he was right there terrifying. I mean, did they ever call him a monster? That's just terrifying. And yet again, it's the fact that he lived for 40 years like that. If it wasn't for the advanced technology, he never ever would have been charged. They would have never known that it was him. If he died, they probably would have went to his funeral as well, thinking, oh, he was such a good guy when he's the one who took their mom.
In 2022, the town of Slaughter, Louisiana was shaken by the death of 36-year-old Lacy Fletcher. Lacy suffered from a medical condition known as locked-in syndrome, making her almost completely paralyzed. Due to her medical condition, Lacy spent all of her life at home, as she began to develop some degree of Asperger's syndrome. Lacy's parents were her caretakers, although they neglected that responsibility and treated Lacy inhumanely, leaving her to relieve herself on the same couch that she spent most of her life. Lacy's neighbors stated that the last time they saw her in public was 15 years before this incident. At the time of her death, Lacy weighed 96 pounds and had contracted COVID-19. On January 3rd, 2022, Lacy was found dead in a couch covered in feces and urine. It was believed that she was in that same spot for years without being catered to. Her body was covered in ulcers, her hair matted and filled with maggots. Her parents, Sheila and Clay Fletcher, were charged with second-degree murder and detained for the severe chronic neglect. Despite all of this, they pleaded not guilty and were released on bail. Sheila and Clay Fletcher will begin trial on June 19th, 2023.
I just don't understand how a parent could ever do that to their child. They basically let their child rot. Why didn't they hire an in-home nurse or get her into a nursing home? This makes me so sad. Probably because they didn't actually care about her. They didn't want her to be happy and healthy. To me, that's quite sadistic. They basically kept her on that couch for years, knowing what she was going for. Like, they could look at her and tell something wasn't right. If someone's basically melted into a couch, that's not good. They're out walking free right now, sick. Really? Are they actually? That's just awful, isn't it? It's the fact that, like, there's proof that they've done that and neglected her, yet they're not in jail.
It was the 10th of February 2018, and a family was enjoying a birthday meal at a restaurant in Millis in Massachusetts. That was until a frantic man with a knife ran in shouting, "I want to kill everyone." Olivia Bergstrom was only 20 years old. She lived with her boyfriend, Benjamin Walsh, in Needham, Massachusetts. It was in the couple's apartment that they shared that he callously stabbed her to death on the day in question. After killing his girlfriend, he left her deceased in the apartment and headed to a restaurant. He knew his family were there enjoying a birthday meal. He had taken a knife with him and started shouting that he wanted to kill everyone as he ran in the restaurant. He launched at his mum with the knife and brutally attacked her. He also stabbed his dad as members of the public and the family tried to subdue him. Now, Jerry, the owner of the restaurant, was actually on his way home when all of this broke out. He got a frantic phone call from one of the employees about the stabbing. He said, "I turned back into the parking lot, ran in the front door to make sure the manager was on the phone calling the police. That's when I went into the room and saw the mum on the ground." Both he and his two parents were rushed to hospital. As you can see from the picture above, he sustained some injuries in the struggle. Luckily, his parents survived the brutal attack. After callously murdering his girlfriend and savagely attacking his parents in a restaurant full of horrified onlookers, Benjamin ultimately accepted a plea deal. He would plead guilty to second-degree murder and assault. He got life in prison, but as part of the plea deal, he can seek parole after 25 years. Although a motive for the murder has not been confirmed, family and friends disclosed that he'd been struggling with substance abuse.
I don't care that he's struggling from substance abuse, to be completely honest. If you take a life, you should not be getting a plea deal. If you take a life, you spend life behind bars. Plea deal is crap. He took a life, he should serve life. Exactly. Why are they giving him a plea deal? I'm so sorry, it's awful that he was going through whatever he's going through with the substances, but that doesn't mean that he should only get 25 years. A life for life. I don't like the death penalty, but incarceration until death. Per family, per girl, what a waste of life. Exactly, it's also the fact, like, after 25 years, he could possibly get out. With me, if you take a life, you should not be allowed out, full stop. If you intentionally go and take somebody's life, or multiple lives, you're spending the rest of your life behind bars. I'm so sorry, but that right there is a kick in the teeth to the victims. Well, anyways, guys, that's really for our video there. That's some true crime TikToks. If we seem like a more true crime TikToks, then we definitely will. Press the big red subscribe and see you all tomorrow for another video.